In this video, we will discuss Metamorphoses Book 3. Now, Book 3 comprises basically 6 chapters. The myth of Cadmus and myth of Actaeon, a myth of Semele, the story of Dionysus, myth of Narcissus and Echo, and finally the myth of Bacchus and Bacchus. First of all, the myth of Cadmus. Now, to discuss about the myth of Cadmus, we need to move back to the myth of Europa. Myth of Europa in Book 2. Now, what is the relationship between Cadmus and Europa? Cadmus is basically Europa's brother. As we have known, in Book 2, Europa has been kidnapped by Jove. Now, Europa's father, Agenor, ordered his son Cadmus, that means Europa's brother, to go and find his sister. And the twist is, if he fails to find his sister, he will be outcasted from the state. Now, young Cadmus had no other way than to leave his land and go find his sister to avoid his father's wrath. But just think, who among the mortal ones can chase the almighty Jove, who is superior than all the gods? So, finding no other way, Cadmus solicited to Apollo, but interestingly, he didn't solicit for helping him to find his sister, but he solicited to help him to find a land for himself. Apollo favored him with a heifer who is to guide him to a land, and Cadmus had to follow the heifer and build a city where the heifer settles for grazing. So after Cadmus found a land, he thought now it's the time he should sacrifice to Jove. So he sent his companions to fetch some water. They went into a cave where a mighty serpent, who is sacred to Mars, was already dwelling, but they didn't know that. After they witnessed the dragon, the companions were too stunned to even speak or move. Soon their unfortunate fate followed them, and they eventually became the victim of the serpent. Cadmus, on the other hand, became very anxious about his friends because they were taking too much time to fetch some water. So he set out to find them. On the way, he found the bodies of his comrades drenched with blood. He murmured, "My faithful comrades, if I cannot avenge your death, at least I can share it." So uttering this, he took his javelin and there started a one-on-one battle between the serpent and Cadmus. Now, there's a huge description of this battle over here. I'm not going into the description. However, Cadmus defeated the serpent at last, but all of a sudden there came a sound out of nowhere which uttered, "So, son of Agenor, why are you gazing on a slaughtered snake? You shall also be gazed on being a snake." This was a curse. After all this, his patron goddess Pallas appeared and ordered him to turn the soil and sow the teeth of the serpent as seeds of new race. Cadmus did as he was ordered to, but it resulted in a quite different way. As Cadmus did what his patron goddess Pallas ordered him to do, men with different weapons came out of the earth, and Cadmus wondered, another foe to face with. But at once the troop members forbade him to interrupt them. They said it is their family feud. He should not intervene. Cadmus saw their death as quick as their birth. That means they immediately started fighting with themselves, and they were dying one by one. Eventually, 5 men left, and one of them sued peace with his brothers. Now, these 5 men were the exact 5 men Cadmus took as his aides when he found the city as Apollo's oracle bade him. Now, this is the story of Cadmus all about. Now we shall move to the myth of Actaeon. Now, have you ever wondered about a situation where you set out for hunting with your friends in a jungle and suddenly you found yourself turned into a stag? You couldn't even understand what your mistake is, that God have turned you into this? And the most iconic scene will be when your companions can't even recognize you as one of them. This is the exact situation happens to Actaeon, who out of nothing will be turned into a stag. Once Actaeon, along with his companions, went out for hunting. After a day's exhaustion, when the sun is about to sink, Actaeon proposed that they should take some rest now and continue their chase tomorrow. The men took a break from their hunting. In a nearby valley, the virgin goddess Diana, after her all day's hunting, was bathing with her companions. Actaeon, on the other hand, didn't even know about this. He aimlessly sauntered around the unfamiliar woodland, and unfortunately, he entered the grotto where those nymphs were bathing. Yeah, it will be so unfortunate of him. As soon as the nymphs saw Actaeon, they all clustered around Diana, who was naked. Immediately, Diana caught up some water and threw it into the face of Actaeon, and she spoke certain spine-chilling words. That means she spoke some spells. As she uttered the spells, Actaeon was immediately turned into a stag. Diana, now out of revenge, addressed him saying, now he may tell the story of seeing Diana naked. And all these happened so quickly that Actaeon couldn't even understand what happened to him. He tried to call his companions for help, but his voice didn't utter words anymore. They were turned into moaning. It was only his feelings that stayed unchanged. His moaning sound caught the attention of his own hounds. Every time he tried to convince them that he is Actaeon, his moaning sound attracted them even more. Eventually, he was torn apart by his own dogs. So this was the unfortunate story of Actaeon. Now, wonder how this situation relates to our own life. Let me explain it to you. There are situations in our life when we witness some people do suffer even when they are not guilty. So these stories, in the name of myths, imply certain situations where innocent people do suffer either for an ancestral curse or just because of nothing. Moving on to the myth of Semele, as we've already known that Almighty Jupiter's eyes have always been weak for women, beautiful women particularly. We have seen in Book 2 how Europa was seduced by Jupiter, and naturally for this habit of Jupiter, his sister cum wife becomes furious every time he practices his habits. This time we will see that how Jupiter will seduce Semele, who is accidentally a kinsfolk of Europa. Wonder how Semele is related to Europa. Now understand this very carefully because these characters are so confusing. Now it all begins from the story of Europa. If you don't know the myth of Europa, go to the description of this video. The link of Book 2 is given there. Now Semele is the daughter of Cadmus, and Cadmus is Europa's brother. In that case, Europa becomes Semele's aunt. As we know, long before Jupiter had abducted Semele's aunt, now he has got Semele pregnant with his son. Naturally, Juno wouldn't be so happy about it. The myth of Semele discusses how Juno took revenge on Semele, although she was innocent. Now, in order to do that, she disguised herself as an old woman, a crone in particular, and went to Semele. Knowing nothing of her intentions, Semele started gossiping with her, and at a time, Jupiter's name came up. Juno said she doesn't believe that Jupiter impregnated her. She told Semele that thousands of men these days claim to be God in order to take young virgins to bed. Juno advised Semele that next time Jupiter visits her, she should tell him to come to her bed as he goes to Juno. That means she should ask him to come to her in his godly form. Now, here, get this very clearly, why Juno advised her to do that. That's a critical thing to understand. Jupiter goes to Juno in his godly form, which means humans can't even bear to see it. They might be burned to death because they are gods. This was Juno's plan, getting Semele and her son killed by Jupiter himself. And in this way, Juno persuaded Semele, and she did as she was asked to do. Although Jupiter tried to stop her, asking that boon from him, but he failed. Now what to do? As Jupiter entered in his original godly form, as expected, Semele couldn't even bear it. She was set ablaze, she was burned to death. However, the baby was still in its foetal stage. So Jupiter, as a father, ripped the baby from its mother's womb and stitched it up in his own thigh. Now, do you know who this child will be in future? He will be the god of vegetation, wine, and fruitfulness. Yes, he will be the god whom we know as Dionysus or Bacchus. And this is the reason why Dionysus is called twice born. Because as his mother died, he also died with her, and he was given a second life by his father Jupiter. Interesting thing is that the myth of Semele can also be termed as the myth of the birth of Dionysus.